This week on Capitol Hill, Speaker Mike Johnson will face his first major test of 2025. House GOP leadership are planning a vote for the all-in-one budget resolution as early as Tuesday evening, a move that could highlight whether or not the party stays united on pushing Trump's agenda through Congress with that razor-thin majority. Inside the budget blueprint is border security funding, extending Trump's 2017 tax cuts, and possible cuts to Medicaid. The Hill's congressional reporter Mychael Schnell joins us now with more insight into how this week could play out. Michael, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
So we want to take a listen first to Speaker Mike Johnson, what he had to say while speaking with the Americans for Prosperity event today.
We're going to score on this one, okay? Only twice in 85 years has a newly elected president, had his party grow or add seats in the House in that first two-year cycle. So we're going to have to defy history, and we will. I think we got a very favorable landscape and the right ingredients to do it, but we got to perform.
Johnson certainly projecting some confidence there. Can Republicans wrangle the votes?
I think he's manifesting a little bit, Judy, trying to put this positive energy in the air, hoping that it transcends into votes. Look, Johnson is in a difficult position right now. He's planning to put the budget resolution on the floor this week, as you noted, as early as Tuesday evening. But as of right now, the votes just simply aren't there. Congresswoman Victoria Spartz, Republican from Indiana, came out last night and said that she is against the current version of the budget resolution, taking issue with the level of spending cuts, wanting more significant slashes in this piece of legislation. And then the other side of the political spectrum, you have a handful of moderate Republicans, David Valadao, Nicole Malliotakis, Tom Bacon. Those are just three of them who are concerned with potential cuts to Medicaid. I spoke to those three lawmakers last week after President Trump endorsed the House's blueprint. They were still not on board with this resolution because of those potential slashes of social safety net program. So I'm not saying Johnson can't do this. He has defied gravity before. He has wrangled the conference together on a lot of key legislative undertakings, but right now that piece of legislation is in trouble. And let's not forget, Judy, Republicans can only afford to lose one vote. That's assuming all Democrats vote no, which is likely to happen, and there being full attendance. That is the smallest room for error really possible. It's going to be a tough lift.
You mentioned lawmakers being concerned about cuts to entitlement programs, including Medicaid. How is the Trump administration responding to those concerns?
We're sort of seeing conflicting situations here and statements here. Trump has said that he doesn't want to cut Medicaid. You know, the folks have said they want to root out waste, fraud, and abuse, maybe reform some things with the program, things like taking non-U.S. citizens out of being Medicaid beneficiaries, adding work requirements, but that will really only generate a small amount of revenue. Certainly not anywhere close to the $880 billion in revenue, that minimum that the Energy and Commerce Committee, which has jurisdiction over Medicaid, has been ordered to find. So on one end of the spectrum, you have Trump who's saying he doesn't want significant cuts to Medicaid, but he also says that he wants to balance the budget, and he also says that he wants to make his tax cuts permanent. Now, in order to get those priorities over the finish line, you have budget hawks, deficit hawks, who are demanding that this package be deficit neutral or even better, deficit reducing. The only way to do that is to have these significant cuts, which many folks are saying needs to move into significant slashes at Medicaid. So again, you have these contrasting statements that sort of puts Johnson in this pickle because on one hand, he wants to achieve Trump's priorities, but he wants to do it in a way that Trump wants to. Is that possible, though? That will be the key question on Capitol Hill this week.
As if there wasn't enough of a pickle for Johnson, we also have, amidst all this drama, this looming government shutdown deadline on March 14th. It seems as if GOP lawmakers are going to have to work with Democrats and get some Democratic support. How are they going to do that? Is there any common ground that they've found here?
Yeah, so by nature, government funding always has to be bipartisan because you have the filibuster in the Senate. And while we know Republicans have 53 seats in the Senate, that is far fewer than the 60 needed, so they're going to have to work with Democrats. The question is, how do they move forward in that capacity? Top lawmakers on the Appropriations Committee in both chambers have been trading government funding proposals for weeks now, though that deal has been elusive. Top lawmakers are still holding out hope that they could maybe crack a deal on top-line numbers. And essentially, a top-line number would allow Congress to move forward with those 12 spending bills that will fund the government for the rest of the fiscal year. But if that can't happen, and honestly right now with all this delay, it's unlikely they're going to get a top-line number deal, we're going to have to start talking about another continuing resolution. Then you get into the question, is it a short-term continuing resolution, a quick hike, and they can continue to work on these top-line numbers, or is it a longer-term thing, kicking the deadline into September when the fiscal year is set to end? Those are going to be the key conversations happening. And then on the side of that, we're also hearing some reporting about demands that both parties are making. Republicans want to try to make some of these DOGE cuts permanent through legislation. Democrats want to try to be a safeguard and a check on some of the things that DOGE and Elon Musk are doing. A lot of these competing stances, and it all comes down to the fact that the longer that the parties are disagreeing on this, the closer we get to a government shutdown. You mentioned March 14th at midnight. That is going to be the key deadline.
Who's counting, though, right? Turning to Democrats now, Democrats are trying to rebuild the party following the devastating 2024 elections for them. And we've learned that from our colleagues Amy Parnes and Hannah Trudeau that donors have turned the faucet off, essentially, for the Democrats. How are Democrats reforming the party and addressing the concerns of donors?
They first seem like they're trying to still gather the pieces of what happened in November. We hear so often about this autopsy that happens after elections. And sure, it's a trite saying, but it really is true. Democrats are going to have to do some soul searching and figure out what went wrong in November and how do they prevent that from happening again. These donors are not going to want to put millions of dollars into an effort and a group that doesn't have a clear vision and a clear plan of how to make good on that money 2 years later, 4 years later. So I think that Democrats are going to have to still pick up the pieces, figure out what their new plan of action is, and go ahead and execute it. And by the way, figure out who's going to be that top person to execute it. It's this question we've still been hearing about. Who is the face of the Democratic Party? Lawmakers on Capitol Hill who I speak to are still trying to figure that out. I think that once they have that vision and that plan, the faucet may turn on after that. But this is key because we know that money in politics, even though people don't want to think it is, it's so central to the political system.
Certainly is. Mychael Schnell, thank you so much for joining
Judy.
us. President Trump hosting French President Emanuel Macron at the White House today. The main topic of discussion for the two leaders, the war in Ukraine and what Europe's role will be in any potential peace talks. Their meeting comes exactly 3 years to the day since Russian troops first crossed the border into Ukraine, kicking off the conflict, and just a week since U.S. and Russian negotiators sat down in Saudi Arabia to discuss peace without input from other European allies. For more insight into their meeting today, we're bringing in White House columnist Niall Stanage. Niall, thanks for taking the time.
Good to be with you, Judy.
The meeting comes today as Trump and his administration have shown this declining support for Ukraine and the war overall. Last week, Trump called President Zelensky a dictator, as you know, and falsely said that Ukraine started the war. Over the weekend, both Pete Hegseth and Steve Witkoff declined to say that Russia started the war. What do you expect Trump's relationship with Western Europe to look like going forward? And is Macron's visit today their final effort to regain support from this side of the Atlantic?
It's certainly a pretty tense relationship right now, Judy, as it pertains to Ukraine. Obviously, Western European leaders are much more adamant about the imperative to support Ukraine and to keep aid flowing to it during this Russian invasion. Now, President Trump seems to be backing away from that, and that has caused a lot of consternation with European leaders. We expect President Macron to make the argument to President Trump that any sort of faltering would reflect badly on him. It would be seen, in Macron's view, as weak on Trump's part if they back away from support for Ukraine. Having said that, as you alluded to in your question, Trump has been pretty emphatic in his statements so far, suggesting, for example, that Zelensky is a dictator despite him having been elected in 2019 and making those comments about Ukraine being responsible for the start of the war.
In response to President Trump calling for new elections in Ukraine, Zelensky offered to step down as president over the weekend as long, he said, as it would end the war and secure NATO membership for his country. A deal still on the table offering U.S. support to Kyiv in exchange for nearly half of their rare earth minerals. Here's National Security Advisor Michael Waltz this morning before meeting with President Macron.
I think President Macron, Prime Minister Starmer, other European leaders have suggested to Zelensky that this is a good deal for Ukraine going forward. It's a good deal for the region. And again, this is about kind of growing the pie, so to speak, economically, and binding the U.S. and Ukraine together for the future.
Now, Niall Zelensky is still demanding better terms. So this is a deal between the U.S. and Ukraine, separate from any peace deal negotiations. How does this fit into the Trump administration's mission to end the war?
It's a great question, and it's a rather complicated situation because it's not always totally clear which deal they're talking about when they make public comments. The argument here is that if Ukraine granted the United States those mineral rights, it would help compensate the US for aid to Ukraine. Now, what is less clear is whether the Trump administration is giving any guarantees going forward, or whether this would be some effort to recoup costs that have already been expended on Ukraine's behalf. I think there's a lot of unknowns around this deal, Judy, including, of course, whether President Zelensky is going to sign on to it.
Now, another wrench thrown into the mix here, could have a whole toolbox at this point. Germany just held its elections with the center-right CDU party receiving the majority of seats in the legislature there. The CDU was the party of Angela Merkel when she was chancellor, but this time around, Friedrich Merz is expected to take the reins. What do we know about Merz, and how do you expect him to handle the war in Ukraine amid this declining support from the U.S.?
Obviously, it's a centre-right party that he's at the head of. Now, he has had quite a fraught relationship at times with Angela Merkel. But on the topic of Ukraine, interestingly, Judy, Friedrich Merz is a supporter of more support for Ukraine. He has at times suggested that the general effort to help Ukraine has not been decisive enough. So although he wants to keep strong relations with the US, he does not at all share President Trump's view of the overall conflict and what should be done about it.
Niall Stanage, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
President Trump's border czar has his sights set on Boston's sanctuary city policies. Tom Homan's accusing the Boston police commissioner of forgetting what it's like to be a cop as he heads to Boston saying, quote, "I'm bringing hell with me." Meantime, activists in California are mobilizing to help immigrants living in the country illegally avoid arrest by ICE. News Nation's Nancy Liu has the latest on the battle over immigration enforcement.
Judy, it was a weekend of rumors and fear among the immigrant population with expectations of massive ICE raids, which is why typical gathering spots for day laborers like this one have been emptier in recent weeks. ICE is not disclosing numbers or details, but word of possible raids has had local activists mobilizing, including a group called the Community Self-Defense Coalition. As the nation's biggest sanctuary state, California has the biggest undocumented population, with an estimate of nearly 2 million, and more than half are here in LA County. Community activists are trying to protect the undocumented by keeping tabs through social media, popping up to patrol neighborhoods when suspected ICE or Homeland Security vehicles are spotted. Over the weekend, the group was at work just east of downtown.
Denounce them, alert the community with megaphones, and also we were there until the agents left and they didn't kidnap anybody. Because of the heightened tensions right now in our community, people really are afraid of what's happening. So we stopped to record just to alert the community on social media that it is not an ICE operation.
Now, activists have been advising the undocumented to know their rights, that they do not have to answer the door if authorities come knocking without a signed warrant. Judy?
News Nation's Nancy Liu, thank you. MSNBC announcing Monday that it'll be canceling Joy Reid's evening news show, The ReidOut. The move comes as a result of the cable network's restructuring that has placed it both under a new president and a spin-off parent company. Reid had hosted The ReidOut since 2020. Her final show is planned for sometime this week. Simone Sanders Townsend, Michael Steele, and Alicia Menendez will now be anchoring the 7 p.m. slot on the network. The changes are also expected to impact former White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, who will reportedly be anchoring one of the week's primetime hours. Meantime, another TV shakeup is happening this summer, this time at NBC. Lester Holt is stepping down as anchor of NBC Nightly News, a role he's held since 2015. Holt said he will remain as anchor with NBC's Dateline. NBC has not named his successor. Woke gets a starring role at the Screen Actors Guild Awards, with Jane Fonda defending the term and taking aim at President Trump in remarks at Sunday's ceremony. Fonda accepting a Lifetime Achievement honor at the SAG Awards without calling Trump out by name. Fonda taking on the president's war on woke. Fonda telling the audience, quote, "Make no mistake, empathy is not weak or woke," and that woke means, quote, "just you give a damn about other people." Fonda saying to Applause, we, quote, "need to call upon our empathy and not judge, but listen from our hearts." Fonda, who's one of Hollywood's most prominent Trump critics, urging the audience to reach across the aisle and welcome political opponents, quote, "into our tent, because we're going to need a big tent to resist successfully what's coming at us." That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Judy Kurtz. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.